if you heard my tale of woe, I got stuck on the train last night for about 3 hours, but fortunately I had my book with me.
Gave you an excuse. That's right.
So I finished it off, and I had to say it's a really well put together book, kind of outlining the whole product management journey. I've got a whole bunch of questions I'd like to ask you, but if I just kind of set the scene a bit first. Marty and I have been chatting up really only the last kind of 2 or 3 months, and I wanted to find a way to introduce him to the kind of Notion family, across the portfolio of our 50 plus SaaS companies. We have a lot of product leaders, specialists, as you can see from the people that have turned up here today. And it's an audience that is always hungry for, thought leadership and expertise and insight. And I felt it was just a great opportunity to try something out, which is a bit of a kind of a ask me anything with yourself. And what I was going to propose, Marty, is maybe if I just kind of intro you briefly, just in case everybody doesn't know, then give you the floor for however long you want, 5, 10, 15 minutes. I've got a few questions that we can kick off with, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So just for everybody else's input, so Marty is the founder of the Silicon Valley Product Group. He's probably one of the world's leading authorities on product management in tech. His book, Inspired How to Build Tech Products Love, is an incredibly well put together synthesis of what it means to be a product manager and the critical importance of that in tech. And I won't go into that more because I would really be giving you a disservice if I try and kind of distill that any more than that. But Marty cut his teeth in tech engineering, I think at HP, is that right? Right. Before going on to join Netscape, presumably right at the beginning, working with Mark Andreessen as VP of Platform and Tools, I think it said. You then went on to eBay as SVP of Product and Design. So, two pretty average kind of businesses, one would say. Amazing outcomes, of course, for both of those. And then did you found Silicon Valley Product Group right after the eBay experience? I did. Okay, so, and then that's really been the continued distillation of that experience and the journey. Marty, maybe you want to give your kind of version of your backstory. I'd be really interested in also what inspired you to write the book, and what was involved in that, and maybe a short distillation of the synopsis of the book and some of the key insights would be great. This is being recorded, so if there is anything that people don't want shared, then I can see if I can edit stuff out. But typically we do create these as an archive that we then share because they're kind of useful assets. So can I give you for a few minutes, Marty?
Sure. I mean, you gave a good summary there. I mean, I did, everybody brings their biases and perspectives to whatever it is. And for me, my first 10 years was as an engineer, and it was at HP Labs, which was the closest company to that in the day is Google today. It was kind of the Google of the day, and it was a great place to learn. It was also a very engineering heavy culture, and so it was a good place to learn to be an engineer. And I got exposed to a lot. Almost my entire career was working on tools and processes for development teams. So product managers, designers, engineers has really my entire career been the focus. The only exception to that really was eBay, where eBay was really a marketplace, of course, or is a marketplace. And that was fun. But for me, at Netscape, at HP, and really at SVPG, it's always been working with product teams. So that's kind of my, that's what I really like to do. You had sort of asked what motivated the book. the biggest thing that really motivated the book, and honestly, I continue to see this today, is the difference between the best teams and how they work and operate and their mindset and their techniques, and between those best teams and most teams. It's just this huge chasm out there in our industry. I thought 20 years ago that chasm would go away because I thought all it was the adoption curve, that, you know, there are leading edge companies like the Googles and Amazons of the world, and then there's the sort of all the laggard kind of companies. But I think that's been proven false, that it's not the adoption curve that's going on. There really are two very different and fundamentally different approaches to how you build tech products.
Say about the chasm between the very best and you were talking about the distribution curve, and you thought that would go away, but it hasn't.
No, it hasn't. In fact, I think it's even getting bigger. The difference between how the best companies work and how most companies work just seems to be getting worse. To me, this was very frustrating and sad. But it, what I spend a lot of my time doing is trying to show most companies how the best companies actually work and why they should switch. So my view of product management is very different than the view of product management in conventional companies. In fact, that's an example where the chasm seems to be getting bigger and different. In most companies, well, I could go on for hours just about that difference, but some people like to capture it as the difference between command and control style companies, the old sort of command and control, and more modern style empowered teams. I think that's accurate, but it only captures really one dimension of the problem. There are more dimensions to the problem. Anyway, that's kind of what motivated me to focus and start Silicon Valley Product Group. It's not only, I do spend a lot of my time on product management, but really that's just because there are other good people, I think, that focus on design and engineering, but product management seems to be the most neglected and or baffling of those areas to most people. So that's where I spend a lot of my time. But honestly, my main interest is in product teams, the combination of product design and engineering.
Could you, I mean, maybe if I just kind of kick off with a kind of a few questions, and then we'll open it up because we've got a lot of people on. I'd be interested in just kind of maybe drilling into that, the fundamental difference between the very best and the rest. And I mean, one thing that I pulled out was this kind of the culture that allows organizations to maintain very high levels of innovation while still executing at scale. And that's relatively easy to achieve at the earlier stages, but very, very hard to achieve at the later stages. Is that at the heart of the problem?
I think it's a big part of it. That's one of the dimensions, is scale. Well, first of all, startups, as you know, there's a natural selection bias going on there. A lot of startups, most startups don't ever make it past that startup stage. The ones that do are usually doing some things pretty well. It's a lot easier to use good practices as a startup than as a large company. And so I think that the startup situation is usually the best. But then once they grow, a lot of things change, especially the role that people think the leaders need to play, and how staffing works, and how you have many teams that need to work as one. So scaling is what sort of shines a light on the real issues. And so, yes, I think the bigger issues are at growth stage and enterprise scale.
I keep going on and off mute because I was just making a few notes. Maybe you could just kind of break that down a little bit into that kind of how you think about product management at the kind of startup. Let's say, you know, we're on our way to finding product market fit. then the kind of actually the kind of scale up phase, you know, or the grow up phase as we call it, when you're actually trying to build the processes to allow you to innovate and scale. And then actually as you get to scale, 25 million, 30 million plus, and you kind of distill that down into some key phases, don't you? Maybe you could just elaborate on those.
Well, you know, you can, I don't like to overdo it because the truth is it's not as discrete as people think. But in general, I talk about it as startup stage where you're getting the product market fit, growth stage where you're trying to grow to a sustainable business, and enterprise stage where you are an established business now. And what's interesting about that is those are not independent stages. Those when you're in growth stage, you also need to be able to start up other lines of business. And so you need startups within your company. When you're in enterprise stage, you need to be able to do start up new businesses and grow them. So probably the best example I would say in the world today for enterprise scale consistent product innovation would be Amazon. Amazon is constantly spawning off new startup businesses. The ones that get to product market fit, they are very good now at growing those to enterprise scale. And many of those early startups are now bigger than the original Amazon itself. So it's, that's what we're trying to do really, I think, is a consistent machine for creating new value for our customers and our business.
I'm just going to ask if people want to ask questions. You can either put your hand up and I'll unmute you, or if you're on video, that is. But literally, otherwise, you can. I think you can request to be unmuted, or unmute yourself, or just put questions onto the chat. Is probably the easiest way, and then we can just kind of work through those as we're going on. So you said your particular interest is the product team and the structure of that, and I think you talk about, you know, the product manager, the product designer, the engineers as a kind of a pod, if you like. Is that the way you think about that when you talk about product teams?
Well, yeah, to me, the core unit is a product team. Also known, like at Spotify likes to use the term squad. In lean startup lingo, they're referred to as durable product teams. But the idea is it is a unit. It is cross-functional product design, engineering, and they are meant to be, but they're often not, but they're meant to be empowered, meaning that they're meant to be asked to go figure out the best solutions to the problems that they need to solve. I actually just brought up the chat window there and I saw a related question to this from Alistair, who's basically asking about, yeah, empowered teams. If that's, you know, how do you make sure that, the way it's usually phrased is, how do you make sure you don't have 20 teams going in 20 different directions? And this is really, gets to what do you need to do to have at scale a set of empowered teams that are all taking you in the same direction. And of course, there's a lot of parts to that answer, but the most important part is that this is really where the job of leadership is to provide that common vision and context. So what is that context? It's the common product vision that you're all trying to achieve. That's huge. It's the product strategy that you're going to use to get there. It's the product principles that you all believe in to get there. It's the objectives for the company, so everybody knows, okay, that's our vision for the next 5 years, but what do we need to accomplish this year? Those are our objectives. If you use an OKR system, that's what it's for. You also need to understand really how is the company navigating? That is the company dashboard, you could often call it, so that we all have the same understanding of the dials that are used to actually control this company. So it's critical. The more teams you have, it's the more important it is to share that common vision and direction across all the teams.
you elaborate on the principles piece?
Well, yeah, vision, strategy, and principles are just three aspects to that context. The vision is describing what you're trying to create, like 3 to 5 years from now, or 5 to 10 years if you're doing a hardware device. The strategy is our path to actually get there. What are the milestones, or what are the different markets we're going to go after, in what order? But the strategy is breaking that up into a more achievable set of products. And then the principles actually slice it differently. That's slicing it based on the nature of the kinds of products you're trying to create. So this helps the product teams make consistent decisions about the nature of the product. You can have 20 product teams around the world all contributing to the same vision. That's a lot easier to do if we all have the common set of principles that drive our product. By the way, all these topics that I'm mentioning, they're all talked about in the book. You can also Google the terms and you can see lots of examples and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, and it is. We tied into that is this kind of your thoughts around product roadmaps, because I think that's something you kind of pull out as being an issue of the non-innovative companies, the laggards, if you like.
Yeah, well, roadmaps don't have to be huge problems, but they are usually huge problems. So, and the main thing to understand why is because what does it mean to have an empowered team? And just to be clear, what that means is the teams are assigned a set of business problems to solve, and it's up to them to figure out the best way to solve them. What does it mean to have an empowered team by that definition, yet also give that team a roadmap of features and projects to deliver in the quarter? That's the part that's sort of nonsense. And the reason this is a problem is because the reason we have this roadmap is because we think these are the things that will accomplish our goals. The problem is even the very best companies have learned that most of the things they think should be on the roadmap turn out not to work. And I could cite some organizations use the number 50% of the things more commonly now. There was a big Harvard Business Review article that shared Google and Microsoft numbers where they share, no, the more realistic number is that 10% of the things that we think should be on that roadmap actually turn out to help. But whatever it is, it's a huge amount of waste. And the way empowered teams are supposed to, you don't get any credit in an empowered team if you ship the features that you promised on time and in budget. Because if that doesn't actually solve the problem, you have accomplished nothing. So this is why companies, well, and again, there's degrees of problem here. In many companies, especially command and control style companies, those roadmaps are coming from leadership. They're like those are called stakeholder-driven roadmaps or community-based roadmaps. And that's really disempowering. It's really the opposite of an empowered team. But even when you have a team that is empowered, if the team, or more problematically, the product manager on that team goes off and creates a roadmap, it's really the same problem, because how do they know that those things on the roadmap are actually going to work? And what they need, again, in an empowered team, you're held responsible for results, not output. We say outcome, not output. So this is just one of the symptoms, but this is a big symptom of the difference between great teams and most teams. The reason I say roadmaps don't have to be a problem is that if all those roadmaps were lists of ideas, it would be pretty harmless. The problem is, in pretty much every company in the world, if you have a document with the string roadmap on it, people think that's commitments. And now you've lost that ability to actually go solve that problem versus just implement that feature. I noticed, Stefan, there's a bunch of questions on here too. Do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. I
All
think we've got 4 or 5 in there. So can you scroll down those on your
Yeah, I can see them, and I'm looking at. We just talked about one of those. I might as well get a nasty one out on the table here because it's a hard one. But somebody was asking, what if you want to have a strong team, but your developers are outsourced? And I want to be very honest. Your odds of having any kind of success if you outsource your engineers have dropped dramatically. And I don't want to sugarcoat that. That's just a dumb thing to do for companies, to outsource their engineers. Now, I want to be clear. Well, I tell this to tech companies all the time. This is one of those big differences between the old project or IT mindset and product companies. Product companies understand engineers are core competency to their business. IT, they figure like, no, we can just rent some engineers. We can hire Accenture or insert your favorite systems integrator and we'll let them do it. They're just sort of rent a developer kind of mindset. That's, those are people that frankly that just don't understand the role that engineers need to play in a tech product company. And I frankly don't have a lot of patience for these people. And I mostly tell them, you really have no chance of succeeding anyway. So best of luck to you. I wrote an article about this called Epic Waste, because the irony here is most companies that work that way think they're saving money, which is so far from true. Now, I do want to have a distinction here. Outsourced developers are basically, these are truly mercenaries. By definition, they're mercenaries. And the issue isn't that they are in another location like India, although that is definitely not a good thing to have them remote. The issue is they're not missionaries. They're not committed members of the team that you really build that relationship with and solve these problems with. So the reason I point that out is because a lot of my favorite companies have offices all around the world. And there's nothing wrong with having offices all over the world as long as you work hard to keep teams together in those offices. So notice that's nothing to do with outsourcing. That's really just about location. So we try to have co-located teams in whatever locations you have. And yeah, I would argue, and don't use outsourcing. These need to be committed long-term members of your team.
I think the distinction of mercenaries and missionaries kind of, if that translates to everybody, I think that's a very powerful thing to bear in mind. There's quite a few other questions on there. Shall I let you just kind of go through those?
Yeah, I can. The next one says, in the team organization, you mentioned there's no leader. How does that work in practice? How do you share accountability? Who gets fired if something doesn't work at all? How do you spread OKRs between members? Okay, so that's a big topic too. Yeah, so let's first talk about the structure of a team. In a team, they're typically flat organization. There's a product manager, there's a designer, and there's some number of engineers, usually between 2 at the minimum and 10 at the max, around there. And you might have a data analyst, you might have a user researcher, you might have a product marketing, but in general, that's a team. And it's a flat structure. Nobody reports to anybody else. Now, that does not mean that people don't all have a manager. They do have a manager. They hopefully have somebody who is worried about their career and developing them. So normally the engineers work for a dev manager and or an engineering manager, and the designer works for a head of design. But they're assigned to a product team and they sit with their product team, and that's what they work on every day. So their managers are assessing them. And of course, the OKRs are just one of many inputs to assessing somebody. So that's a whole other topic. And then another important question in there was, how do you spread OKRs between members? And this is hugely important because you don't. The point of product teams is that OKRs are assigned to the product team. One of the most common rookie mistakes of using OKRs is that the engineers get their OKRs, the designers get their OKRs, product manager get their OKRs. And of course that you can see how that immediately defeats the purpose of a team. Instead, the product team is given a set of OKRs that have 2 or 3 objectives and some key results, and the team solves those problems together. That's what it means to be a cross-functional, empowered team. They are there to figure out the best way to solve that problem, and that's always a combination of product design and engineering, that they solve that. Now then the question of accountability. What happens if the team totally fails? Now, in most companies, that doesn't lead to a discussion of who gets fired. You do need to talk about what does it mean to be accountable, especially for things where the teams are committed to other teams that they will deliver something at the end of this quarter. I should also emphasize that OKRs are only meaningful when the key results are actually provided by the team, not by leadership. The objectives typically come from leadership, but the key results need to come from the team. The point is the teams have to decide what they commit to, but then that we do try very hard to actually deliver on what we say we're going to commit to. And if they don't, it's not usually a firing. It's also not usually just, oh, well. To me, best practice that I see for this is they'll have some sort of post-mortem or retrospective at the end of the quarter on why they didn't meet that. And they have some peers there and they talk about it, and the idea is to get better. A lot of times they don't meet their objectives because management changes their mind. And that's the kind of thing that we need to highlight. So anyway, that's what we do share accountability. It is also true, though, that we want, this is sort of what's different about the product manager role. We tell product managers that if the team delivers on its results every quarter, it's because the team did what they needed to do. But if the team doesn't, it's really the product manager. And so the product manager needs to be standing up there and taking responsibility for that. It's not that the product manager is like necessarily to blame for all this, but you do need somebody to really sit down with the CEO or whoever it is and talk about what really is going on and what needs to be improved. So if you had to name a person, that's usually the person we would hold. And they are the one responsible for the backlog, and the backlog is what's going to be built. So, so I think it's right that that's the person you're going to hold accountable. All right, then it says, while growing, we've started tracking KPIs to see the performance of the company, and they're going to move to OKRs. So just to be clear, you don't move from KPIs to OKRs. OKRs are a system that uses KPIs. KPIs are typically the dashboard. OKRs is just a way of empowering teams to go solve business problems. And the key results are how we measure if they actually solve those problems. But it says it's even more complex to handle, especially for the tech team. Would you have some examples of OKRs? Should it always be set up in the scope of a product team, product oriented? Well, that's a big question. There is a lot written about OKRs. I've written in the new book several chapters on OKRs. There's a new book that I would strongly encourage people to read by John Doerr called Measure What Matters. It's probably the first thorough book on OKRs. There are thousands of examples of OKRs. I mean, normally, just to set your expectations here, of course, OKR stands for objective and key results. The objectives are qualitative, the key results are quantitative. So you might have something like grow the business, get more revenue, reduce churn rate. Those are typical objectives. Key results, though, are specifically, what are we saying? Well, at the end of the quarter, the team believes they can reduce our churn rate from 8% to 7%. That's an example of a key result. The point is they have to be business results. And what I want to clarify, just because this is such an extremely common mistake, if you have a project you want to do, like integrate PayPal as a payment method, that's not a key result. Launching PayPal by the end of the quarter is not a key result. That's an output. That might help. If our goal was to grow the business or increase conversion rate, launching PayPal might help as a new payment method. But if it doesn't help, we have failed. Our job is to make sure that whatever does work, whatever is necessary to get it to work, that we figure that out. So that's what we're trying to do. And yeah, we obviously have to build things, but the point is, if that PayPal integration doesn't work, we have to try something else. So hopefully that answers some of those OKR questions. But the main thing I would suggest you do is read the Measure What Matters book. All right, there's another question here from Stan that says, we recently acquired a company that has kind of a servicey history on how they deliver their product. In other words, they're saying thinking in projects, linear delivery, responding to market pull. Maybe this is sort of trying to say they were very sales oriented. You know, some big customer brought a check, and so they just reacted to that. And this person's trying to drive a cultural change of turning them more into a modern SaaS part of our suite. Any tips on what to focus on to create momentum, show quick wins from working as product teams, make people believe these methods improve their life? The transformation is a lot harder than starting up an agile team. Yeah, okay, the point is, this is an example where you're trying to change the culture rather than create a good culture from the beginning, and that is true. And I'm glad this example came up, because acquisitions are often, well, I mean, our industry track record for acquisitions is terrible, right? It's amazing how you'll take a good performing company and now they're terrible. And this is often one of those differences, is it's living now in a different culture. It might have a different sales channel, different go-to-market strategy. There's all kinds of things that can be different. What this question is highlighting is, yeah, what if it's a different culture and you want to show this new culture? And so let's see. I mean, the first thing I'd say is changing culture is extremely hard. It's one of the hardest things there is, and that's what I'm spending a lot more of my time on, because I really think that is this difference I was talking about between the best companies and most companies. Their culture is different. It's not just their culture around that they are running things based on projects versus running things based on product, but there's also very much a mindset that's going on there, and that's what's being talked about here. In sort of sales-driven cultures, everything's driven by salespeople who are representing big special requests, or even an executive that has an opinion. But in a strong product culture, we know that that's not really the main source of innovation. Now, what this person's asking for, Sten, I think, is some quick wins. My favorite technique for changing this kind of cultural problem is to use a technique called customer discovery program, which is all about coming up with a very limited, usually 6-7 customers or prospective customers, and focusing on coming up with a great solution for them. It shows first of all, it's the best thing you can do for the sales organization, because it's all about developing reference customers. But also it's a great way to make sure the team is focused on solving real problems for the customer. The difference is they're not solving it the way some salesperson or even customer thinks should be solved. They are empowered to figure out the right way to solve it, but they only succeed when they do solve it. So if you just Google the term customer discovery program, or it's also known as a customer development program, and the idea is you're developing a set of reference customers in parallel with developing the product. It's kind of a complicated technique to describe. It's like the longest chapter in the book, for example, but That's my favorite technique for changing this culture. All right, there's another question here. How would you recommend responsibility is divided when a startup moves from a single team to more than one team? Working on a single product. Yeah, this is referred to kind of as how do you slice the pie? Because it's pretty simple when you're a startup of one or two teams. Like if you're a marketplace, you might have a buyer team and a seller team and maybe a search team, and that's fine. That's pretty straightforward. Everybody's got clear, the boundaries between teams are very clear. The dependencies are minimized. But as you get larger, 20 teams, 50 teams, 200 teams, this is a lot harder problem of how do you slice up the pie. And there is no one answer to this because there are many factors that you consider. Some of the biggest factors are who are our customers. So you like teams to be focused on specific type of customers. Certainly a huge one is to minimize dependencies between teams because that gives teams much more autonomy. Another big one is architecture, which is usually our biggest factor constraining how we set up teams. Architectures drive technology expertise, drives dependencies. So architecture plays a big role. Skill sets play a big role. So for example, if your company's got machine learning as one of the areas that's an important area, almost certainly you don't have enough people in your company that know that technology. Equip every team with somebody who knows how to work on that technology. So you'll often build team structure around that limited expertise that you have. So there's all these different factors, plus a whole lot more. Location plays a role. The metrics, the KPIs that you're focused on plays a role, but everybody has to look at this and decide what makes the most sense. It's usually the head of product and the head of technology look at this together and make a decision. But that is something that every company has to deal with. And I tell companies that there is no one perfect answer because no matter what you optimize for, you are optimizing against other things. So you're trading off things. All right. Another question here is how do you communicate the roadmap or yearly goals with the board or executive team? Can you have a roadmap based on business goal values? How do you set objectives for your team? Yeah, this is getting again to that same sort of question about empowering teams. So and it's kind of ironic too. Board of direct, I mean, been on several boards. The board's language of boards is business results. And it is kind of ironic that so many companies want to present roadmaps to the board because good boards know that that is pretty meaningless. What really matters is, are they actually accomplishing the business objectives? The problem is they often don't see any business objectives. They want to know what is going on. Now, of course, the OKR system is designed around business objectives. So if you've got OKR system and you're using it properly, where you have company goals and product team goals, then that is what you should be talking about with the board. And the board should like that a whole lot better than a bunch of features that are being discussed. And then there's this sort of question there about, can you have a roadmap based on business goals? There is a flavor of roadmap. It's called an outcome-based roadmap, which I like. Outcome-based roadmaps are not a problem. The issue is that they're not very common. I wish they're very rare, actually. If it was up to me, that would be the first change. People would change from regular roadmaps, which are output, to outcome-based roadmaps. And the main difference is in an outcome-based roadmap, every item on the roadmap isn't talking about integrating PayPal. It's talking about, in this quarter, we're going to focus on getting conversion rate up from here to here. That's an outcome-based roadmap. But that really requires this cultural change we've been talking about. And then the third part of that question was, how do you set objectives for your teams? This is really the goal this is the responsibility rather of the leaders, usually the head of product. the head of product is looking at the company objectives and saying, okay, this is what we need to accomplish for the year for the company. We need to make sure that teams are working on things that contribute to this. Partly you solve this just by sharing with all the product teams what the company objectives are, and some things are going to be obvious to them. If they're on the seller team in a marketplace, they know that we're going to have to do certain things to make this business result come out. But they often have to also take, all right, we might have 4 big objectives and we have 10 teams. So we might say, go to each team and say, we need you to focus on these 2 objectives, each team, something like that. And that's how they do it. A lot of people think when you have empowered teams, there isn't a goal. What's the point of leaders? But it actually is more important. It's just they're being different. They're not doing command and control anymore. They are enabling these teams. All right, here's another question. How do you deal with language barriers between customers and product? Our product and engineering team do not speak the languages of all geographies where they're active. Well, first of all, that is really common for global teams. In fact, my favorite example of this was I got to work with early Skype, and you guys probably know Skype was based in London. Their engineers were in Estonia, and by the time I finished working with them, they had 600 million clients installed around the world. So, Skype has been an international company from the beginning. That's not really a problem. Yes, we do need to test with users, and those users speak all kinds of languages, users and customers. So do we need to find somebody who can translate for us? Absolutely. It's not very hard, but yes, you have to do that. It turns out it's not that hard when your product team is in another part of the world from your customers. It's a lot worse if your product manager is in another country from your engineers. That's a problem. That's a much bigger problem. But you can be anywhere. I mean, I suspect your portfolio is all over Europe and maybe beyond. That is not a problem. You just need to make sure that wherever your customers are, if you're working, maybe your company is based in France, but you're now focused on getting a bunch of reference customers in Germany, then you're going to have to make sure you are really testing with customers in Germany. I've personally attended customer tests where we test our product on customers in languages in countries all over the world with languages that mostly I don't understand at all. It's not a problem at all. So a translator helps you, or a local, they're called country product managers, can help you, or a product marketing person can help you, or you can literally find somebody on TaskRabbit or something that can help you. So not that hard. Somebody here said they like the John Doerr book. That's good. Regarding the balance between, the balance between discovery and delivery time, we feel like we spend little time in discovery for existing products. We feel that mostly in delivery mode, pushed by customers. What good patterns have you found of companies at growth stage that balance discovery and delivery? What do you think about the role of agile methodology and application to success of product when agile is applicable? Well, all right, the agile one is easily, I mean, to me, every team should be using some form of agile. And it doesn't matter what form, whether it's Scrum or XP or Kanban or most companies are some blend. But agile is really a delivery technique. And you should be using that if for no other reason that we learned many years ago that having a consistent stream of small releases is much better for us and much better for our customers. So I rarely meet a team that is not using some form of agile for delivery. And I can usually embarrass them into fixing that very quickly, just because that's old. And the problem is it doesn't solve, as this question really gets to it, it doesn't really solve the hard problems. It's important and necessary, but it's no way sufficient. So discovery is really about how do you make sure that that team is building things that matter, things that will work. So it is unfortunately very common that teams are just doing delivery. Now that's mostly a consequence of having somebody else give that team a roadmap. Because at that point they feel like, well, the discovery, if there was any, was already done. Somebody else takes responsibility for what we're going to build. So the teams feel like all they're there to do is deliver. And again, that's very much a mercenary team. So it is normal that a team is doing both discovery and delivery. And discovery is really nothing more than making sure that the things you build will actually be worth building. Now, you could just use your engineers and build it QA and push it live, but that is an incredibly slow and expensive way of finding out which things actually work. So that would just be called, irresponsible discovery. It's not discovery unless you're killing at least half the ideas that you try out. That's the easiest way to tell.
You have, just jumping in there, you have a big focus, don't you, in the book on discovery is about value and outcome. And
yeah, I mean, there's really 4 things we're looking at in discovery. These are the 4 questions we're trying to answer. Would the customer buy it? That's value. Would they buy it? Or if they've already bought your SaaS product and you're contemplating a new feature, would they choose to use it? That's value. Usability. Could they figure out how to use it? That's the design side. Technical feasibility. Can we actually build this? And then business viability. Will this solution work for our business? Is it something that can be marketed effectively, can be sold by your sales channel, can work for your legal issues, your privacy constraints, your financial constraints? That's viability. Those are the 4 things we're trying to answer in discovery. And we have a whole set of techniques that help us answer those questions quickly. And so, to that question, on the top level, what's the balance between discovery and delivery? It's not a clock thing. Product managers and designers spend almost all their time on discovery. Engineers spend almost all their time on delivery. That's natural, but they each are helping with the other. So, but that's a minority of their time. It's usually about an hour a day for the product managers and designers to help in delivery. And when I say help in delivery, they're not helping to code, but they are answering questions that come up in delivery. Like, you never thought about this use case. You need to handle that. And when I say engineers need to help in discovery, it's usually on the lines of about a half an hour a day. And what we're asking them to do, the engineers, is to play with the prototypes and tell us how to make this better, and also tell us whether things are a good idea or a bad idea. This might touch an area of our tech debt that's going to require major change, and so it wouldn't happen quickly. We need to know this at the beginning of an idea, not the end of an idea. All right. Why do you think that co-located teams perform better than remote teams? Do you have some examples of how a remote distributed team underperformed when compared to a similar but co-located team? So first of all, this is not just me or rocket science. This has been known forever. The real point, I mean, maybe the way to phrase it is it impossible to succeed with a remote team or a distributed team? No, it's not impossible. I can even name a handful of companies that have managed to succeed with distributed teams. But for every one I know that succeeded, there are literally hundreds I know that have failed. Now, why is that? I mean, and that actually, this is an area that I'm writing a lot about lately, and I'm even contemplating another book because now it's not about co-located teams, but there is a chemistry that happens with good teams that is almost impossible to achieve with remote teams. Again, not totally impossible, but almost impossible. And that is that chemistry is critical to actual collaboration and innovation. And this, chemistry is just kind of the word I use for it and some other people, but it's also known as psychological safety. It's also known as trust vulnerability. There's you get into a lot of psychological discussions about this, but for a team to actually collaborate, there has to be a relationship between the members of that team that is really hard to happen if they're not. The reason Apple spent literally billions of dollars on their Office, like Apple is sort of an extreme example that hates spreading teams around the world. I mean, they almost never do. They even struggled going from one headquarter building to two headquarter buildings. But the reason they work so hard on their building is because they want these collisions, they're called, where they want teams to be together during the day. They want them to get coffee together. They want them to get lunch together. They want them to grab a beer together after work. They want them to have this sort of personal relationship, most especially within a team, but even across teams. And so remote teams rarely have that. And most of the examples I know that have delivered well in remote teams either used to work together, co-located, so they have those relationships, or frankly, they're not innovating. What they're trying to do is just get some very specialized skill sets located around the world to just crank out a bunch of code. So again, it's not impossible if you're not co-located, but your odds, I think it's just really important to understand your odds go way down. And I know that's not politically correct, but I think it's honestly, it's not even controversial. Anybody who's worked in both scenarios has seen that. It is a pain. And I also want to emphasize, I think remote workers can work really well for lots of other jobs. So there's a lot of other jobs in customer service, in marketing, and sales that remote works just great, arguably even better. But a product team is a special animal, and that chemistry is all important. Yeah, and there's a lot of research too. I've actually read some books recently that, are just the academic argument for this. Anyway, following on to the question about discovery versus delivery, how do you make space for completely disruptive innovation as opposed to incremental or sustaining innovation? Ideas that could potentially sit at odds or challenges the prevailing product strategy or principles. Well, there's really, the first thing I'd say is there's in most teams, there's two kinds of product work we do. And I would phrase it as, I normally phrase it as innovation versus optimization. Optimization is really about value capture. It's getting your product to work as good as it can. You should absolutely be doing that. A/B testing for split tests where you've got 50-50, you're making low risk changes. We're doing this all the time in parallel. That's optimization work. It's low risk. It's a great thing to do. And the sad thing is a lot of companies, that's all they do. Innovation work is about creating new value, not capturing that value. In other words, instead of trying to get it 5% better, we're trying to get 5x the number. That's what product teams are really paid to do. That's what discovery is all about. Now, there's a whole spectrum there between a 10x improvement and a 2x improvement. I would still call both of those serious, very valuable innovation. One you might call more disruptive innovation, and one you might call more ongoing. But I definitely do think you want to have room for that. That's what I love about empowered teams. But yeah, there's no guarantees either for that. Anyway, I think, and there's more we could talk about. There's techniques that people use to let teams try more wild and sort of out there ideas, and I love that as well. The short answer to that, though, is you need to include your engineers in not just delivery, but discovery, because most of the time, the disruptive innovations are actually coming from the engineers, not from customers, not from your executives, not from your product managers, and even not from your designers, but from engineers. And the reason for that is because they're working with the enabling technology every day, and so they know what's just now possible better than anyone. And so most of the examples I can cite of true disruptive innovation, I can point to the engineers that did that. All right, there's a few more questions here. What degree should we tie product outcomes to revenue outcomes? And if so, how? Well, I mean, they're not normally different. The point of business outcomes is they're business outcomes. And that's not only revenue, but revenue is certainly a legitimate one. And it's probably the most common one I see. But other things like churn rate are also very critical business outcomes, and expenses that can be important to business outcomes. So it's not only revenue, but we absolutely, if that's what the company needs to do, and most of the time it is, especially if you're in growth stage or showing product market fit, then we need to tie our product outcomes to revenue outcomes. That's fine. Greetings from Estonia. Estonia, cool. All right, and then how do you balance driving team internal alignment on roadmap while not mortgaging your 18 to 24 months of resources? I'm not sure I understand that. Let's see. Communicating rough roadmap ideas long ahead is good for driving, but always ruins the risk of becoming, yeah, well, there's sort of two things in there. Please don't do 18 to 24 month roadmaps. That is just insane in our industry. So unless you're building a device, even the best device companies, iPhones and Android phones, they're not on a 2-year roadmap anymore. So you don't want to do that. I don't even like 3-month roadmaps. So definitely not, 2-year roadmaps. And you have to be really good about, this is the point, is if you talk about this on a roadmap, it becomes a commitment. What we want to do is change the language from features and roadmaps and commitments to business results. This is the discussion of outcomes. That's what OKRs are designed to help. And so the short answer, the 3-letter answer to that is probably OKRs. All right. Any insight on aligning product roadmap with sales team efforts, especially if sales were selling new market? Yeah, absolutely. That's called product strategy. Product strategy lets us align our go-to-market strategy with our product efforts. That's a big topic, of course, but it's a really important topic. It's the product strategy topic. You just Google that, or in the book I talk about product strategy in support of product vision. That's where that is. And it's a great tool for actually aligning the product teams and the sales organization. And then the last question I see here is, how would you work with an engineering team who have a poor understanding what the business actually does? They're just used to doing what they were told. All right, well, this is a good, first of all, this is an example of a mercenary team, not a missionary team. The person we hold responsible for this problem and fixing it is the product manager. So the short answer is the product manager needs to do his or her job. Obviously, if the product manager doesn't understand the business context, then you've got a much bigger problem even. But the product manager's job is to make sure everybody on the team understands this business context. We have some very great ways of doing that. One of my absolute favorites is to bring an engineer with the product manager and designer to visit customers, not every engineer to every visit, but bringing one engineer to each visit is a great practice and very eye-opening. The other thing I'd say, in the best companies I know, they try very hard to only hire engineers that want to invent and not just build. That's part of their interview process. Google, Netflix, Facebook, they're all focused on engineers. Amazon, that care about this. It's also true that I know of many teams, including at those companies, that where not all their engineers feel that way. It's okay if you have some engineers on a team that just want to build. What's not okay is if you don't have at least one or two senior engineers that understand that their job is to invent, not just build. That's where you have a bigger issue. All right, I hope I didn't miss any questions. I tried to get through that whole list. I don't know how much time we have. Do you have more time?
We allocated an hour. I mean, I think we're at your beck and call, really. Presumably 9 a.m. your time. You've probably got a busy day ahead of you.
I have some more time if you have any more questions, but if people are already going to drop off, that's fine too. Whatever you like.
Well, I had one in terms of, it was really interesting. You started the book by this kind of characterization of the product manager as the putative kind of CEO of a tech company, and there's certain characteristics of the very best product managers that can really stand out. And you mentioned, of course, that many VCs look for those characteristics in the early teams. Can you kind of distill what those kind of key characteristics are that you look for?
Well, yeah, and I should say that if I had to isolate one of all the problems that exist in bad product teams, if I had to pick one that was the most important problem, to me, it's product managers that are not skilled enough for the job. They are weak product managers. This is a really common problem in our industry. All they are, they think that they've gone to training on how to be a certified Scrum product owner. They think that makes them a product manager, and it's just not even close. What really makes a product manager is they have to understand, and this is what's referred to as CEO of the product, not that they're a boss of anybody. They're not. A product manager, by definition, is not the boss of anybody. But they do, like a CEO, they have to understand all elements of their product. They have to understand how the product is sold, how it's marketed, how it's funded, financed, how it's actually, what makes it compliant around the world. In the EU, you've got privacy issues, you've got security issues, we've got technology issues, we've got all kinds of, like, especially with B2B companies, we have many kinds of users, not just one. We have influencers, we have buyers. The product manager needs to understand all of these dynamics. This is what they bring to the team. One way to think about product, very straightforward, but it's pretty accurate, is your engineers are essentially solving for technical constraints. The designers are solving for user constraints, and the product manager is solving for business constraints. And yeah, we know what the designer needs to know. We know what the engineers need to know, but a lot of people don't realize the product manager, if you're going to be an empowered team, then you need somebody on that team that understands these elements of a business. And that's what the product manager needs to bring to the table. And then you've got all the parts you need to make good choices. So, the good VCs I know, that's exactly what they're looking for. They want to know that there's a proven product manager as a co-founder, somebody that has learned this. Because, it's just, teams are only as good as these product managers, and they know that there are not enough good ones out there.
Yeah. How can people learn more, Marty? You run some conferences, meetups, events, read your book, follow your blog.
Yeah, I mean, the book is, if you haven't read the book, I hope you do. And the new edition is 100% new from the first edition. So the first edition came out 10 years ago, so it's quite old, but I would encourage the second edition. I occasionally, I go to typically London a couple times a year and do a public workshop, which is really a crash course, 2 days, going very intense on everything we're talking about, but really into depth. I'm also going to be in Europe in October. I'm I'm doing a bunch of talks around Europe. Product Tank, you know, at Product Tank, it's just a meetup of product people. I'm doing one in Amsterdam and one in Budapest and one in Berlin. If any of those cities are where your teams are, you know, I'm going to give a talk there. Anyway, yeah, and just I have a website, svpg.com, that my partners and I, and we put all the stuff we write up there for free and no advertising. We're just trying to share this stuff. So feel free.
Do you do individual consulting and advisory work? Can you do,
yeah,
do mentoring, coaching, that type of thing?
I have two partners. My work is mostly advisory work with startups, but I also have two partners that go and actually do on-site engagements. So they'll go in and spend time with the company and help them do these kinds of transformations. So so hopefully that if anybody's interested in that, just email me. In fact, make sure, Stefan, if you could share my email, anybody who wants to send any questions that we didn't get to, I'm happy to answer them.
That's very kind of you, and it's been a really interesting hour. It's flown by. I mean, I know everybody's on mute, but I'm sure I can say thank you for everybody. We've probably had about 30 people on the call, and a great turnout. Lots of really interesting questions. But you know, I really appreciate your time, Marty. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you in the autumn.
Looking forward to it. Thanks very much, everybody. Good luck.